Penny here from Mould Rescue. Penny has 11 years of progressive experience. You're continuing to learn. In restoration and specialist service remediation services. Penny's been an industry spokesperson for many years and is currently on the education chair of the Australian Restoration Industry Council. Penny is one of the most qualified mould remediation experts in Australia. So I'd like you to welcome Penny.
Hi.
Clicker?
Is that my clicker?
That's your clicker. And can you stand there for the microphone?
No.
Sorry.
Alrighty. So, first of all, no questions from you over there and no questions from you over in the back. Otherwise I'll throw things at you. You know who I'm talking about. Alright, so who's come across mould before? And what did you do about it? No, any particular experiences that you've had that... Yeah, I'll get it out of you. Right, so I've got to find the clicker. Okay. Right, so that's me, that's my van, that's exciting. So, mould is part of our environment. We're meant to have mould, it has a role in our ecosystem, okay? It's an organic decomposer. There's no such thing as a mould-free environment. People say, oh, I'm going to make it mould-free. It's like, well, there's mould in this room. You're breathing mould right now. When you go outside amongst all those plants in the air, you're breathing mould and you're not dying. You're okay. It's all right. You just don't want really high levels of mould in any sort of home environment or an office environment or anywhere that you're spending a lot of time, or, you know, in a water-damaged building. And you got to remember, just because you don't see mould doesn't mean you don't have it. So, different types of mould and different types of damp in a building, right? So you've got, you know, rising and falling damp, and you all know this stuff, right? You've got poor external, internal drainage, you've got failed waterproofing, you know, elevated humidity, and that all depends on how the building is used. So it's how the building is built, how the building is used. These are all the variables. You've got plumbing and roof leaks. I'm dealing with a house at the moment that was without a roof for 6 months, and now it's completely shit. So for mould to grow, you need the right temperature, the right conditions, and the right materials and substrate. So, you know, lots of things to consider. Must understand the importance of the relationship between water and mould. So, water and moisture are the key. The longer materials are left wet, the more secondary damage occurs. So the question you have, if you find something in a house that you're inspecting, the question is always going to be, well, how wet? For how long? If it's been wet for 5 minutes, it's not going to be that bad. If it's been wet for 6 months, if something's been leaking for a long time, if you've got cracks in your pathway, if you've got thermal bridging, water going into the subfloor, and that's been happening for a while, you've got some issues to think about. So vapour pressure and humidity. So vapour pressure is high pressure to low pressure. It depends on how the air flows in a building, right? And it depends on how the building is used. So if you've got a lot of wind coming this way and you've got windows open that don't open this side but they do this side, it all affects how the house, you know, breathes and moves. Far too often there's a complete lack of understanding of what happens in terms of microbial contamination and water damage, both from an individual owner and from insurers and loss assessors. In Australia, the best practice has been to utilise an international standard called the ICRC S520, which deals with, you know, contamination, you know, after a building's been wet, and that's the clean-up side, the remediation. In a water damaged building, there's always an increase in water activity from leaks, flooding, and other sources of moisture. You've just got to find them. So, in words of a great instructor of mine once said, you've got to be a hunter. Who said that? Oh, yeah, you know, over the back there. You've got to look. You can't just walk around a building and go, there's a couple of things wrong. You can't look at a room in isolation and think, well, there's mould in this room. You've got to start from the outside. You've got to understand the whole building. You've got to look at the building from a whole, from how it's built, how it's used, you know, which way it faces, like all the critical things. Very important stuff. Mould commonly occurs as a result of excess condensation. People don't look at their windows, they don't open their blinds, and they don't understand that condensation occurs. The amount of people that I talk to on a daily basis when I go into someone's home and I talk about things like humidity and condensation, and they're like, what do you mean? Flabbergasted, right? People don't understand what humidity is. You know, but then you have to explain it, and you have to explain that that humidity is relative to temperature. It goes up and it goes down. So I have to explain the absolute basics. So relative humidity in occupied spaces should always be less than 65%. You're not always going to be able to achieve that, but you've got to understand, again, how the building's built, how the building's used, and airflow, air movement. Don't clutter your place, move your furniture, clean behind your furniture, all these sort of things. You know, if you've got a consistent elevated humidity for a constant amount of time, you're going to get some mould. You're going to get elevated patches of mould, and it's going to go to the corners, and you're not going to understand what's going on. If you're not aware of your house, or if you go into into buildings to inspect, these are the sorts of things you've got to look for. Look behind furniture. Interesting stuff, hey? Because you're all sitting there with your mouths open going, oh, what? How does mould spread? Again, I've talked about it a couple of times. Airflow. It becomes airborne. It's like that patch of dust, with the light going across and you see all this dust in the air. It's a fine particle. Mould is an ultra-fine particle, even smaller, between 2 and 20 microns in size. Okay? Microns a millionth of a metre. So we're talking tiny. When we look at it under a microscope, we're looking at it at 600 time magnification, so we can count it and identify it. So again, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there, and it doesn't mean you don't have it. Okay? It also doesn't mean that it's at a level that's bad. It might be fine. I mean, sometimes you see a little bit of mould on a blind. I've got blinds in my house that open horizontally, but my windows open vertically, so whenever I've got my windows open, which is all the time, I've always got this patch down the side that's always dirty, and there's probably a bit of mould in there. I don't freak out about that thing. That's not long-term water damage. It's not long-term mould. It's just a little bit of patch of dirt that I get to occasionally. But again, it can spread. Wind, comes up, you've got windows open, you've got front doors open, you've got people moving through the house, you've got kids playing, you've got adults doing whatever they do, cleaning, hopefully. So, the most important thing to remember, and when you're in a building and you're inspecting, it's the right actions. So if it's a building issue, you've got to find it, you've got to fix it, and you've got to dry it. And I say dry it because what happens is, you go, oh, there's a plumbing issue. Oh, let's get a plumber out. Well, that's only half the issue. That water's been going somewhere for a long time, and probably on the other side of the room, or, if a bath is backing onto a hallway, then it's going into the linen cupboard and it's all going to be in the hallway. You've got to go further than just fix the issue. You've got to find the issue, fix the issue, but you've got to dry it and remediate, right? If it's a behavioural issue, and often it's both, you've got to understand the behaviour that's giving you mould, and you've got to change the behaviour. And people often aren't aware, and it's not everybody's just got mould because they're dirty and they haven't cleaned, and often they do, but sometimes it's just they're doing things that they're not aware of. And people are busy, they've got kids, they've got dogs, they've got husbands, they've got kids going to school and sport and whatever. Sometimes people just get busy and stuff gets left behind, right? So my job is to make people aware of the things that they're doing inadvertently that's creating mould. So I say to people, open your windows, like open those beautiful plantation shutters, like physically open them, move your furniture to clean, open your wardrobe doors and clean stuff out, and don't dry your washing inside, and turn the extraction fan on. First of all, clean it, make sure it's functioning, make sure it's vented to outside, and turn it on and use it. Kind of important stuff, yeah? So this is the consequence of, we got the plumber out. the plumbing issue got fixed. What else was I needed to do? Well, this kitchen's now completely gone. So there's no point in fixing the plumbing issue without thinking about, well, where's the water been going? Something's been leaking for a period of time, and in this case, a long time. That plinth, or the base, where the cabinetry was, completely shot. Rotten. I don't know how it just wasn't falling apart completely. So that whole entire kitchen's now gone. And I'm having to remediate the entire house. So what should have happened? Fix the plumbing issue, then investigate further. And it all depends on how wet, for how long. That's obviously been happening for a while because that was rotten. Still wet, even after the kitchen came out, the floorboards were gone, the flooring was gone, the associated tiles were gone. Things overlap. So it all went. So when you're doing an inspection for mould and damp, got to look at the building as a whole. I start from how is it built, how is it used. A lot of you do this anyway. A lot of you do it innately. So, slope of the land. What's the drainage like? Leo?
Penny, can I just ask?
Yes.
As a pre-purchase inspector, you don't have that qualification that you have done a mould course or any identification of a course.
Sure.
As a prudent inspector, if you see what appears to be mould present on a ceiling, for argument's sake, in a laundry,
Right.
should you, as the building consultant, should bring a hygienist in to further
Look,
investigate?
If a pre-purchase inspection person identifies something that is out of their scope, absolutely, tell them that. I don't know, but it's exciting.
What are you trying to say there?
I was flapping about too much. So, if you identify something that is out of your realm of qualification or knowledge, pass it on. Recommend that they call in a specialist of that field. Absolutely. If you think there's asbestos and that's not your thing, get someone to call in an asbestos. If you think there's an air quality issue, get an air quality person. If you think that, if you can see some identifiers of meth, call in a meth person. Anything outside your specialist expertise, absolutely recommend to the homeowner or the person you're doing the pre-purchase inspection for that they call in a specialist. Absolutely. So, starting from the outside of the building, slope of the land, first thing I look at, drainage. If you've got slope of the land going from back to front, this side to this side, I always go to that bottom corner where, all roads lead to down there and see what's going on. General maintenance of the house tells me a lot. If people are house proud and they're always fixing something, that's fantastic. If they're not, then it shows. You look at your eaves, are they falling down? Are the gutters, have they been emptied, cleaned out? Areas of damper in the house that could be allowing ingress to the subfloor. If crawling into a subfloor is not your thing, or there's not enough access, or it's blocked, stick your head in, have a bit of a poke around. But if you think that, there's a bit of a problem down there, recommend that it gets investigated further. Inside the house, look at the layout. Is it one of those little boxy houses that's all closed off and there's no real cross ventilation? Are windows painted shut? Do windows look like they've ever been opened? Is there condensation marks, drip marks running down the window and then, down into the corresponding wall? Are the window frames rotten from condensation? Is there clutter? Look behind furniture. Ask a million questions about their lifestyle and what they do and how they do it. And, people say to me all the time, oh yeah, I ventilate my house all the time. And that turns out to, well, they leave at 6:30 to 7 o'clock in the morning, and then they're out for 12 hours a day, So they're not home until, by the time they pick up the kids and whatever and go to sport and dancing and stuff, they don't walk in the door, and they live on a main road. And so you keep them talking and you say, oh, you're out of the home a lot. Do you leave for security? What's it like around here? Do you leave the windows open? Oh, no, we can't leave the windows open. So you're really not ventilating the house. You got to remember, a house is like a human. It's got to breathe all the time, not just when you decide. Because during the course of a day, humidity can rise and fall. Pressure can rise and fall, depending on heat, depending on the wind, depending on what the weather conditions are. You don't know. You're not there. You're not controlling an environment when you're not there. And if it's all locked up and closed up for 12, 14 hours a day because you're out, earning money so you can pay the right amount of taxes, then it's not going to breathe. Yes?
Have you got an instrument that does the humidity?
I've got a bunch of meters that do that. Yes, I've got a bunch of meters that cost me many thousands of dollars that measure indoor air quality of different types. 65% is what the what ASHRAE recommend, but that's only for a constant basis. So you've got to remember, you're not always going to be able to control that. If you want to, you can put a dehumidifier on during the day and run it. Set it at 50, 60% and run it. If you're going to go away for a weekend and lock the place up, run a dehumidifier or something, depending on the size of the house. Sometimes what I do is I manage airflow. So sometimes the issue is not always about being able to keep your humidity low, because that's a challenge often. But what I do is I keep my ceiling fans, running at different times of the year, constantly, just on low, just to make sure air's moving. And, because your problem's going to be, your lounge that sits that far off the ground, air gets stagnant underneath there, it goes into cornices, right? So sometimes you start thinking, what's going up in the corner of my house? And who turns their lounge over once a year and looks underneath it, besides me? Anybody? No? Right. Nobody does that. Oh, you all do it, right? Good for you. But it's the furniture that sits this far off a couple of inches off the ground. That's going to be your problem areas. Behind, your bookshelf that hasn't moved in 10 years. When was the last time you pulled all those books out, pulled the bookshelf away? I mean, I've done that at customers' houses where I've been doing inspection, and there's like, what do you want to move that for? Just trust me. Let's move it away. And then they're staggered and they clutch the pearls and go, oh my God, what's behind there? Everything's behind there.
They don't even read the books.
That's right. You can tell because they're dusty. And they've got mould and they stink. And then they're like, once you start moving the books, they're like, oh, that's bad. Yeah, that's bad. Oh, I wonder where the mould was. Okay, well, there you go. I moved a lady's bed. She was 8.5 months pregnant. And I said to her, she lived in Marrickville. It's one of those little narrow houses on a main road. The front window was painted shut. And I said to her, would you mind if I just move your bed and your bedside, tables? Sure. I moved it away, black, all the way across. She was sleeping with it, sleeping inches away from heavy, heavy toxic mould, right up until she was 8.5 months pregnant. She picked up a handbag and the baby the small child that she already had in her arms, grabbed her handbag, called her husband on the way out and said, we're not going back. I don't know what happened after that, but, you've got to look closely and you've got to understand not just how the building's built, but how it's used. Very important stuff. So, drainage planes around a house. I look at a house that was being built by one of the chain builders in my area, and for the 6 months of the build, it's a wet, slushy ground. Everything around it's wet and slushy and it's just horrible. And I think, what's that slab going to be like for when they're putting carpet down? And they don't test it. They don't test the moisture in the slab. They just assume it's going to be okay. But all that high level of moisture load around the home is going to affect the home, especially when it rains, when they're just at the framing stage, frames get wet, frames get mouldy, they just don't do anything, just board up and keep going. I don't really know how that works, but you've got to make sure ultimately that your drainage planes are right. So you've got to drain the site, you've got to drain your assemblies, you've got to make sure everything drains away from the house, from the top to the bottom. Moisture checks. I inspect and check under every tap, every sink, every laundry, and I look at it and I'm looking at the back. What I'm looking for is things like, well, that piece of grey pipe is a different colour to the rest of the pipe. Did you ever have a flood? No, we never had a flood. Well, why is this piece of pipe different? Oh yeah, we had a plumbing issue a while ago. Okay, what happened? Oh yeah, well, everything leaked out. Oh right, so you have had some sort of water issue. All right, tells me a story. Then I sort of poke it. Sometimes I've been and done moisture checks at the back of a vanity, and I've not even been able to get my pins in. It's just gone straight through, and I could get my fingers straight through. You know, oh, we didn't realise that. Oh, well, you wouldn't. Then the whole bathroom comes out. You've got to start looking underneath. People don't look underneath their sinks either. I'm just silly like that and, you know, do things like that. So, you know, pull out your cupboards, and I look under sinks. I measure moisture checks. I do moisture readings of floors and walls and ceilings. Thermal imaging is something I use a lot because it tells me a story. It tells me temperature differential. Sometimes that can be a false positive because there might be a metal strip sitting behind a door or behind a light or something, but worth checking. If you think that there's a moisture issue up there, get up, take a proper moisture reading with one of your moisture meters. It's worth doing. The other thing I check to see what's going on in the home, and that's only relevant for while I'm in the home, is, you know, ambient readings. So I take my, you know, humidity, temperature, humidity, dew point. So people, this is the other thing I'm always having to explain to people, the relationship between temperature and dew point. Dew point's the condensation point, right? And that varies, yeah? So that's the other thing, and people are like, oh, right. So you sometimes you're explaining the basics of, you know, air quality to people. So, you know, when you go out and your grass is wet, that's because the temperature's dropped overnight, or the, you know, the humidity in the air is, yeah. So, yeah, you're going through those types of things. So when we get to the remediation process, when we've identified what the issue is, we've fixed the issue, we then have to do things like make sure that we're doing it properly. So if I'm going from room to room in an entire house, or if I'm just dealing with one room, I've got to make sure I've got containment up. So I've got to protect the rest of the house, because when I start pulling things out, contents out, and doing cleaning, I want to make sure I don't cross-contaminate the rest of the house by pushing all my mould spores out, and just, you know, that would be silly. That was just, you know, you're cross-contaminating everything else, and there's people living in the house. So we put up containment, we make sure it's tight, we make sure it's got negative air. We've got, I'm protecting small contents, so I've got to pack those out of the room. Protect large contents like furniture, I've got to protect the structure. And then at the end of it, we've got to verify. So I usually get, if it's a really small job, our international standard says I can evaluate that myself. If it's a large job like the house I'm doing at the moment, which is an entire house, an external company will come in and verify that I've done my job properly and that I've cleared a certain level. So very important stuff. So this is just an example where I'm sealing off rooms, you know, and I've got some zips in there so I can walk through and stuff like that. But inside the room, I've got, you know, air scrubbers giving me 4 air changes per hour, depending on the size of the building. So, you know, different stuff. This is some of the equipment I use. It's not all. I've got thermal imaging. I've got penetrating and non-penetrating moisture meters. I've got the little skinny one on that side is specifically for wood, for timber, hardwood timber flooring. Then I've got the other little one with the red on it is for concrete. So it goes down about 19 mil and tells me what's going on in concrete. If I need a proper reading, then I have to core drill a slab and actually do in-slab readings, which I've done for some multiplex in John Holland just recently, 25,000 square metres, and they've got 8-level building, and, you know, they want to know what's going on, so we pick a floor, take in-slab readings to tell them whether they're good enough to put, you know, flooring down or not. So for commercial flooring, the ASTM standard is 75% in-slab readings. That's relative humidity is what it's taking you. So very complicated. If we're actually drying a building, then I use vapour pressure differential. So any substrate like concrete or anything that's particularly wet, timber flooring, wall, structure, that's a high pressure environment. And what I've got to do is I've got to create a low pressure environment to coax the moisture out. And I've got to do that by putting, you know, a combination of equipment in, and then I excite the water molecules inside the structure, get them moving really fast, and then they've got nowhere to go, and then they come out to the low pressure environment. All very complex, but, you know, there's a theory of evaporation. I'm sure you find it very boring. So it's about the right actions. If it's a building issue, find it, fix it, dry it. If it's a behavioural issue, understand it and change it. So this is some of the stuff I do just to give back to my industry. I contribute to the Standards Writing Committee. Yes?
A lot of buildings that we look at, the commercial buildings,
Yes.
or the multi-level residential buildings,
Sure.
have car parks in the basement, and there's been a growing trend for developers to have what they call a wet basement or a wet car park, where they have walls that are excavated and they might not seal them, and they'll put a secondary wall to cover that wall, like a metal wall.
Yep.
Or even a masonry wall, and they'll leave the wet basement, even put drains around the perimeter to remove the water instead of waterproofing the basement. What do you do about that, and what's your opinion on it?
I think that it adds, so where you've got a wet basement is what you're talking about, it potentially adds to the moisture load in the building. Now again, it depends on how the building's built and, you know, how many levels it is and how far down that level is that's wet. As long as they're draining, if they're trying to drain the water away, that's at least one thing, that's a plus. I'm not really happy about it being a wet environment because there's contaminants. We have what's called the stack effect. Stack effect means that any contaminants, whether it's bacteria, mould, any volatile organic compounds, float up. Like, you know, there's always pathways in a building, you know, whether it's through cracks and through light fittings and into wall cavities, and there's always pathways for contaminants to move. Air moves. So wherever air can go, these contaminants can go. So I'm not happy about having wet basements. Are we going to be able to change that? I doubt it.
Is there, I reiterate what Dale's saying, in Newcastle we've got some new ones that have got wet car parks, and I've been surprised because the storage baskets or
Cages.
are relatively close, and you always sort of, you know, wonder what to put in your report in regards to for the people to be aware of.
Well, anything that's being stored down there that's porous, you know, if people go, I'm just going to stick my sleeping bag, you know, with all my camping stuff and my canvas tent or whatever, I'm going to stick it in my cage, it's a really damp environment. That's going to get mouldy. Then they're going to go camping and get in their sleeping bag, or they're going to bring it up into the unit. They're going to cross-contaminate. Or they're going to put it in their car, so the car's going to get mouldy. You know, there's all sorts of cross-contamination opportunities there.
Do you identify which mould it is before you do the treatment, and which chemicals are you using to do your treatments?
Okay, so yes, we can do air quality testing and surface testing, which we use specific machines and consumables. They get sent to a lab for identification. If you've got a place like that kitchen I showed you, I don't need to identify what type of mould it is. I don't even need to identify that there's mould there. It's obvious. We know what to do. We know what the issue is. let's deal with it, because that's otherwise it's another few $1,000s and time to deal with that. Second of all, if you don't know what the issue is, or if someone's saying, look, my child is sick, I don't know if it's mould, or my husband's sick, or whatever, somebody in the house is sick and we don't know if it's mould, my doctor wants me to check, can you do some air quality testing? Yes, we can do that. We can give you the lab report. I can interpret that to a certain extent. Then you can take it to your doctor and the doctor's going to say, yes, that's what your issue is. If I find high levels of mould in this particular house, I'll go looking for it and I'll find the cause. In terms of chemicals are never the issue. Chemicals are never what you want to use, and there's no easy route to getting rid of mould. Dead mould, and that's the best that any chemical will do, is kill mould. Dead mould is more toxigenic and allergenic than live mould. So if you get someone that's going to say, oh, I'm just going to get some bleach or vinegar or some fabulous chemical because some label or somebody's told them, and they're just going to go, oh yeah, I'm going to get rid of it, it's all right, with a chemical, you're just going to cross-contaminate and make it worse. Yes?
I find a lot of the subfloors in houses have got that browny, whitey fungi growing
Yep.
right through, especially when you've got inadequate ventilation and
Yep.
inadequate drainage and or both. Should that, after the ventilation and side drainage or subfloor drainage rectified, should that mould, that like fungi then be removed?
What I often recommend in situations like that is if it's been, constantly wet and you've got a little bit of that stuff, I always recommend that you take the top, 20 mil of soil away. And if you've fixed the airflow and if you've fixed the drainage into your subfloor, you've also got to be cognizant of what is the pathway of air up to the building. If it's an old building, you've got really loose, gappy floorboards, anything you do underneath there is going to go straight up. So if you're putting in any sort of fan ventilation into a subfloor area, you've got to make sure your negative is stronger than your positive airflow, because otherwise you're just pushing air upwards. So just back to chemicals for a minute. Chemicals are never the way to go, because at best you're going to kill mould and you're just going to leave behind, angry mycotoxins and cross-contamination. You want to get to the source, and then you want to make sure that you're sealing off a room with negative air. Then we do a lot of vacuuming, because what we do is called source removal. Not necessarily removing substrate, but if we're just cleaning mould off a wall, then we'll vacuum. Then we'll do a clean with some sort of, we might use detergent, we might use an antimicrobial, but we'll vacuum, then we'll wash, then we'll vacuum, because what we're doing, we've got very strong high efficiency vacuums and we're sucking up the mould spores and contaminants and anything else into a HEPA filter.
So exit mould is not the best one to use.
I will throw something at you, but no. So you've got to remember, things like bleach, domestic bleach is 3% sodium hypochlorite mixed with water, right?
So if I may ask, if you're decontaminating a wall-contaminated mold,
Yes?
would it be an ideal to treat that mold first using hydrogen peroxide
Nope.
and then let that sit there for maybe 24 hours
Nope.
and then you can vacuum it
No.
after that?
No. Sorry. So what the gentleman just asked was, can we use hydrogen peroxide and then leave it for 24 hours and then vacuum it afterwards? No, is not the recommendation. First of all, understand the cause of the mould. Always understand the cause of the mould, because if you don't understand the cause of the mould, you're going to remediate and it's just going to keep coming back and you're not going to understand why. Hydrogen peroxide is a good stain remover, as is bleach. So if after I've done all of my treatment and I understand the cause and I've contained off my area and I've got negative air pressure in my containment site, and I've vacuumed and I've washed and I've vacuumed, if there's a bit of staining, I might use, a good 8-9% hydrogen peroxide to take the staining away. But it's a staining I'm not mould removing.
I should have said 40-60
No,
concentration.
no. No. We have specialised products of hydrogen peroxide, and they're 8 to 9%, and I can boost those up to nearly 20, but you don't want to use just a 40-60%. So no, that methodology is not going to work.
What about oil of clothes?
Oil of clothes, tea tree oil, vinegar, blah, 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 no, no, no.
So the average inspector here that gives, I don't know, but I would say at least 8 out of 10 homes that I do, there'd be mould in them.
Sure.
And when we give a verbal to a client, and they might ask about the mould, what's something that they can, even if it's just on one window and they've got to clean it off?
Vacuum it. If you think it's a little, if you think it's inconsequential,
It's not going to remove mould off of glass.
yeah, it will. Vacuum it first. If you think it's an inconsequential little tiny patch and there's no systemic issue that's causing the mould, vacuum it with a brush head, wash it down with some good warm soapy water, and then maybe re-vacuum it. But as long as you're comfortable that there's not a systemic issue.
I lived in Canberra for quite a few years.
Sorry about that.
I'm here now. But an issue that used to arise there was quite common, particularly in the older areas, was there were a lot of unflued gas heaters.
Yep.
With bowls of water in front of them through winter. It was -5 outside.
Yep.
The water would just stream down the inside
Yep.
the windows and you get mould in.
That's just water damage. That is straight out water damage. Unflued gas heaters, extraction fans that actually don't go anywhere, or they go straight to a roof cavity. People don't manage. If you manage your moisture in a home, you manage your mould. But people are unaware. They've got the old type of dryer. Oh, I can't put that on because it's going to make all my walls wet in the laundry. So what they do is they put all their washing on a dryer, on a clothes cloth, and they stick it in front of their heater. And what do you think happens to all that moisture in, family of four's clothing? It evaporates into the air. All that moisture is put into the air. So, not good either. So what other things have you come across as building inspectors?
Just further on what Gary was saying.
Sure.
I come across where they think that that you don't need a flue and that you can go into the roof cavity and it will disperse. It needs to be taken through. It needs to be.
It really is better to be ducted to outside. I mean, you've got to think, what's in a roof cavity? Dust, 20 years of rat droppings, other bacteria, all your insulation, whatever other things you hide up there. So what other situations have you all come across?
Common problem in Sydney in some home units
Yes?
is where the ceiling becomes the exposed concrete roof
Ah, yeah.
and they suffer the condensation problems.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, again, that's managing your indoor environment.
Common problem with home units, and unlike most single houses, home units seem to suffer far more. And I guess mainly because most home units only have one external wall with windows in it or two.
That's right. So they're...
Unlike a house which has got 4.
That's right. So your airflow cross ventilation options are limited in home units because often you'll go into, the vestibule area, you'll open up your unit door and you'll have, a sliding door out into balcony, which is almost never left open during the day, and then you might have one or two alternate windows, and they're all on the same side of the building. That's not going to give you enough airflow, and yet we build them. The big builders are building these blocks of units, and they're all little boxes. They're tiny. They're all closed off little tiny 3x3 rooms. 4x4 if you're lucky,
So do we need to change the...
We need to change a lot of things, yes. We need to change a lot of things.
So in a subtropical environment where humidity is high and you open all the windows, so it's still very, very humid.
Sure.
Internally and externally.
Absolutely.
And you've got mould on ceiling.
Okay, so I don't have air conditioning at my house. And in summer, when we have very high humidity, I manage that by keeping my house clean, uncluttered, and I have windows open and I have my ceiling fans on in the bedrooms, and I've got a couple of strategically placed fans in, my main areas. And, they don't have to be going full bore, but it just means that air's moving. So it's when it gets stagnant and gets stuck under your lounge and stuck in the corners. And so not perfect, okay, but I don't really want to put air conditioning into my house. And so that's my option. So I keep it clean, keep it as uncluttered as I possibly can. And, I keep air movement. So Townsville, for example, we've just gone through a big, that big storm up in Townsville. There's still properties being, restored up there. And my lot, the restorers, are getting sent out by insurance companies to houses. And then it's left for 8 weeks before the builders can get back in and do their job. So we've gone in and done our bit. And then it's left as an unmanaged site. And then the builders go back in and go, it's all mouldy again. Yeah, because, you've left it for 8 weeks.
Have you had much experience in more recent times with more modern buildings with double glazing?
Yeah.
Does that affect...
Sometimes, and again, it depends on how the building's used. It depends on occupant behaviour. Occupant behaviour is key. Absolutely paramount.
Because it's more prevalent down south, Canberra and down the Snowy Mountains and what have you.
Again, sorry about that. What sort of experiences have you all had with mould? Have you come across any sort of severe issues? So here's the other thing to remember is that what affects one person, I've been into houses where there's been like one speck of mould and someone's dying. I've been into houses where ceilings have been black and they're like, oh really? Oh okay, yeah, whatever. High functioning family, high functioning children, no one cares. Everybody reacts to mould differently. So very hard to get an absolute world standard of what's acceptable and what's not, because everybody's going to be different. I can go through and remediate a house and get clearance from an external hygienist, but there's going to be a customer that goes, oh no, I'm sensitive to everything.
Does that mean it's in their head?
Yeah, there's definitely a mental aspect to this, because sometimes if you think you got it, you got it. There's a lady at the moment that I'm dealing with in Chatswood, and she hasn't cleaned her house in 10 years, and she's breeding pigeons on her balcony, which she's got pigeon crap all over her balcony, and even one of them came and nested inside one of her bedrooms in the wardrobe. And pigeon poo carries plasmosis and all sorts of plethora of other bacteria and hygiene issues. And every time I say to her, well, this is what we're going to do, this is our approach. Oh, but I might be allergic to that. Yeah, but this layer of dirt that you've not cleaned in 10 years is the bigger issue. So yeah, it's very hard for people to sort of get over that.
I've been in ground floor home units.
Yep.
Where the ceiling is black with
Yep.
mould.
Yep.
And then when you sort of make the inquiries, you find it's a 2-bedroom unit. There's 7 people all colour living in there.
Yep.
And quite often, they cook a lot of curry and stuff.
Yes, I understand completely. So when I talk about occupant behaviour, keeping places uncluttered, that refers to people as well. Having an over-occupied space is never good, because you've got extra showers, extra cooking, extra washing, extra drying, extra everything. And we ourselves, we slough off a lot of bacteria and stuff in the house. So, yeah, over-occupied spaces are not good. And then you've got, the student accommodation or the teenage son that wants to just, well, I'm 14 now, I'm going to close my door and never open a window. And my wet canvas shoes, I'm just going to leave under my bed, and my gym gear, I'm just going to put in the cupboard, and, and the mother goes near it, then there's the go away. those things, right? You know. And we, you know, in terms of occupant behaviour, we want everything to meet. Well, there's people that want everything to be neat, and tidy, and perfect. So they close bedroom doors and they close wardrobe doors, and wardrobes are full, chock-a-block. It's a dark environment. There's no air. You know, what's going to happen? There you go, because humidity rises in that space because it's a tight, you know, space with no air. There was a hand up over there.
Yeah, I was just, a lot of places I go into, especially in water, they have that damp rig, the containers. I mean, I think they're pretty much useless, but
They are.
yeah. And you just,
Advise people to get a dehumidifier, and don't skimp on them. Get a decent one. But dehumidifiers are only good if people use them properly. So again, people go, I've got a dehumidifier, but it didn't work. I've still got mould. It's like, yeah, but you put it on for half an hour of a morning, and for half an hour of a night. That's not going to, you know, you're managing your overnight drop for condensation, and you're managing your overnight build, you know, for humidity during the day when you're not there. So get one that's got a setting and a drain out hose, right? So it's on all the time, but it just cuts in and out. So you set it at, say, 50 or 60%, and it just cuts in and out when it needs to. It detects what's going on in the air and goes, oh, I need to turn on now and run a little bit.
And you've got to empty it too.
Well, if you have a drain out hose and stick it in your bathroom or somewhere there where you can put the hose into a drain, you don't have to worry about that. Otherwise, you've got to empty those little stupid things every, you know, however long. Yes, in the back.
Just following from that, opinion on mold-resistant paints, etc.
Mould will persist. It might keep it at bay for a little bit, but it's not going to stop it forever. And again, if the conditions are right, if occupant behaviour is poor, if the place is cluttered, if there's enough moisture, you're going to get mould. So people think it's the perfect panacea. You know, I'm going to get mould resisting paint, I'm never going to get mould again.
What about houses that have been flooded from hail damage and it's got into wall cavities?
So,
The walls should need to be removed.
look, again,
Long periods of time.
okay, it's the how wet for how long. If that got damaged and somebody was out there within 24 hours, we could dry that. Left for how long?
9 months.
Gone. You know that picture that the other guy had where it was all timber framing? Yeah, the house I'm working at the moment looks like that because it was without a roof for 8 months.
I've had a lot of issues with a number of insurance companies with those storms up in the river.
Yeah.
And they're just not doing it. They're just, all they're doing is they're treating a bit of surface mold, painting out.
Chicken fleek.
And I've been recommending
Yeah, they're doing a chicken fleek. I've got a couple at Barara at the moment. I've got West Pennant Hills. It's all in that same category. Well, again, that depends on the person's insurance policy. Not all insurance policies are the same. You know, you've got to know what you're covered for, but most importantly, you've got to know what you're not covered for. Because people just go, oh, well, I rang the number and I quoted my credit card and I've got insurance. Doesn't mean you're covered for anything.
But if the insurance company has been neglectful and not replace the roof in a 9-month period and allowed water ingress to come in, then that's compounded the problem.
Again, does their policy cover that? Did they have sufficient coverage to include that? You can't just automatically go, well, the insurance company should do this. They only should do something if that policy covers it. If their policy was a really low level policy that didn't cover storm damage or water damage or something, and it's not automatically included in every policy. You've got to understand these things. Not everybody's going to be covered, and not always for the amount of it. Sometimes if they might, I know people have, you know, they've got $5,000 worth of sunglasses, and yet their total contents policy is only $100,000, and they've got a $20,000 bespoke made lounge suite. And it's like, well, how do you think a $100,000 contents policy is going to cover that? When you stand in one spot, you go, well, that coffee machine's over there is a couple of thousand. All those Prada sunglasses are a couple of thousand. You know, this lounge suite, 20,000, and before you know it, you're not covering anything. Understand your policy. Just because an insurance company is not doing something, often it's neglect. I understand because I'm in this business. You know, that's why I have a business. But people's policies just don't cover everything.
So what are your thoughts on gassing approach? I mean, there's some mold removalists suggesting that they can seal a room and then gas it as opposed to direct clean, or possibly direct clean as well.
Never do that, ever. First of all, you will breathe that stuff for days and weeks afterwards, despite what they tell you. Second of all, it's not part of the international standard, and the reason it's not part of the international standard is because it's not effective. Again, look at the source. Why is it there? Why is the mould happening? Understand what's going on. Source removal, which might mean removing parts of the structure, it might mean just vacuuming, wiping, cleaning, but understand. Gassing is just the quick and dirty fix, and it's not going to work. Any more questions? You've got questions, I know. Yes?
Quite often we get the phone call from a tenant.
Yep.
And the phone call is, can you come and do an inspection on my home, where I'm living, where I'm renting, because we've got mould growing, and we want to report that to the real estate agent, and we want them to fix it.
Yeah.
We say, yeah, that's fine, it'll cost you so much, we'll come out and do an inspection. Oh, we're not paying you for it. Can you bill the insurance?
No. Yeah, no.
And we say no. And they say, well, how am I going to get my house? I can't live in my house. Who's going to fix this for me?
Again,
What's your answer for that?
again, let me send you an invoice for coming out and doing it. And even if they pay me to come out and do an inspection, and I do a thorough inspection and I write a proper report, and they're very happy, you know, my reports are always good. But sometimes the cause of the mould is them, occupant behaviour, and they don't like it. And I say this to them up front, even if you pay me and come out, I can't guarantee you the answer you want.
Yeah, that's what we say to these people, is you basically, generally a unit, and they generally work all day.
Yeah.
They don't have
Ground floor, south facing, you know, I start with the questions of, are you ground floor? Oh yeah, how'd you know? Are you south facing? Oh yeah, how'd you know? Oh, southeast, you know. And yeah, exactly right. So, you know, very early on in my career, I would go out to those, and very soon, you know, I could be doing those all day and getting no money for those. People want to use you for free.